Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. So, in this week's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the evolution of Templars. As promised, I have neglected the Templars for too long, so it is time we give the Templars some light. And in this episode, we will have some slight spoilers for the ending of the Order of Ancients for Valhalla, so please be warned. But we can take a look at how Alfred's idea of assassins of Templars became the Templar Order through the help and actual idealization of Bernard de Cruz and Hugo de Payne's act and Latin rule. So it's going to be an interesting talk about, and as you all know, I'm good with lore, but I'm not perfect, so I need help. And in this episode, I'm joined by Andrew from Visions of the Past.
Why, hello, Declan. It's been too long.
I know, and if I ever need lore podcast, I'm always running to you because your lore shows are some of the best I've listened to so far.
Why, thank you. That means a lot to me.
And I think several episodes, I think I may have listened to one or two of your episodes to get a recap of that I'm not talking nonsense. Comes to something when you've been playing the games for 14 years and you have to watch YouTube, listen to podcasts, and read hours of material just to remember details from 14 years ago.
Well, there's just so much now that you can only hold so much knowledge. You gotta kind of make room for some things and go back to spark that memory. So I can completely understand it there. I watch more than my fair share when I come to doing a podcast just to make sure I'm remembering things correctly.
So, are you ready to begin this really interesting topic that's battered my head?
Oh, this is going to be fun, talking about Bernard of Clairvaux and, well, I guess his friend, Hugh de Payne.
Hugh de Payne. I apologize, being dyslexic, I am terrible at pronouncing the name, so if anyone is upset by my pronunciations, I can only offer sincere apologies. It's just, I struggle reading and I struggle with pronunciation, so I do apologize. So let's just get the basics out of the way. The Templars are a very paganistic cult. That's what they've always been, since kind of contradictory to Assassin's Creed 2's glyphs, but they were meant to be formed by Cain's first act of murder for an apple was meant to create the Templars, but judging through the Cult of Cosmos, Order of Ancients and Origins, and Valhalla, the more paganistic Isu cult, aka Instruments of the First Will's birthplace, as I'm going to keep telling people. Mm-hmm. But Alfred did something majestic. He killed the Templars to then rebirth them as a one-god type organization because of his deep beliefs in Christianity at the time, which would then evolve into Father of Understanding. Did I miss anything?
No, Alfred the Great, he did use Eivor as a tool to destroy the English Brotherhood, the English Order of Ancients. Now there's many more coming throughout the world because there's so much more land. But his plan was essentially to wipe away the Order of Ancients and rebuild under one god instead of under this belief, which he felt was blasphemy, of the Isu. So he wanted to essentially tear down the established order that he wanted nothing to do with it and build a new one that was out for striving for order.
And it's very weird to see that Odyssey, Cassandra was tasked to destroy the Order of Ancients because, well, the Cult of Cosmos, because they became too greedy and they relied too heavily on Tainted Ones, which is the Isu human hybrids like Cassandra and Alexios. So it's kind of funny to see full circle that the Templars have to be destroyed again to create a more unified order.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is the first time that I actually realize the parallels between Odyssey and Valhalla in that aspect, because the Grand Magister, the leader of the cult of Cosmos, used Cassandra to destroy the cult of Cosmos, the same way that Alfred, the leader of the Order of Ancients, used Eivor to destroy the Order of Ancients. All because of the same thing. They believed that they were out of what they needed to be. They were striving for order, and Aspasia felt that Demos brought in too much chaos and took over her spot, and Alfred felt like they were following blasphemy with the Isu instead of believing in just the Christian God.
And
That's
I think both parallels work fantastic for the time period. You know, Greece at the time was very known for its multiple gods and its faith and its stories, but having Alexios, someone with a sword of Eden, very powerful, it kind of brought the realization of a god, of a demigod to life. And as I've done some notes on the old Cult of Cosmos, it's not what Aspia wanted. You didn't want a Templar order run by a demigod. I know it's not a demigod, but to people, that's what it was. So, and then as you said with Alfred, they're already worried about Vikings bringing paganism in through Norse mythology and Norse worship. So I think it's a perfect synergy, and I think it works really well for the lore of Assassin's Creed.
yeah, it's great, and you can see the parallels of what Alfred wanted to what it eventually became, calling himself the good fellow soldier of Christ and what he believed in. So I can see how Alfred's order, or whatever he chose to call it, could eventually become the Templar Order that we know of today.
Now, this kind of brings us on nicely to the Latin rule. Well, Bernard and Hugo Pains, because at this point, after Alfred's work and running the Templars as a power of understanding, they were kind of still a secret cult. You know, they couldn't do what they wanted to do without being judged. And it wasn't till the Latin rule with Hugo Pain's help and Bernard de Cruz that things kind of really took hold for the Templars.
Yes, and it with the Latin rule, it was historically basically how the Templar order was meant to live their life. It was known specifically as the specific behavior for the Knights of the Templar order, outlining how they were supposed to live, modeled on the rule of Saint Benedict, which is actually still in use today by some religious sects. It also borrowed from the rule of St. Augustine. Eventually, it was expanded on, and that the what they did with the rule of St. Augustine and the rules of St. Benedict is that they took them and literally adapted them so they made more sense by active military knights rather than the monks. For instance, one states that the fasts were less severe so that it didn't interfere with their combat.
And there is something else interesting about the Latin rule that they did sign for how the Templars would be is, and this may be off topic, but I think it's really great to bring it up. There's actually 72 clauses for the Latin rule. And that doesn't sound significant, but apparently the 72 is one of the biggest numbers in Assassin's Creed lore. It
Yes, it
is
is.
it's a password to gain access to the Colosseum Vault during the retrieval of Apple of Eden in 2012. There is Rodrigo Borgia, Maria Auditore, and Israel Putnam all died at 72. Construction of the Colosseum started in 72. William Miles in Lima told Sean that Team Osaka was supposed to make contact with headquarters in 72 hours but went dark. So 72 clauses for how the Knights Templar should be, kind of fits spookily into this whole mythos of 72.
I
Did they
feel like you
know?
pulled those stats from my podcast on the number 72.
Damn it, I
Um,
spotted it. Ah,
um, but yeah, originally written in the Council of Troy in 1129, there were 72 clauses. Eventually, it was expanded on to 609,
wow, too
and
many.
it was way too many. And the funny thing, at least I see it as funny, is Hugh is often seen as the first Grand Master. It was the third Grand Master who expanded it from 72 to 609. So it's one of those things like he went, okay, well, we need to also do this, 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 and this. And it probably expanded too much, but based on the early Templar, once they were backed by Rome, everything exploded. They were poor, but then they weren't because of this. They received money through donations. They covered they guarded land for people that went to the Crusades, and they just kind of really expanded. And that's why historically, one of the reasons you see them going from a primarily military order to a clan of bankers.
That's how you get your money.
Yes.
So it seems that even though Alfred's seeds had been sown for a unified order, it really wasn't till Hugo de Paynes and Bernard, I'm just going to call them both equally, reformed things into something, well, bigger. Talking to Baldwin II of Jerusalem in 1129, Hugo Paynes actually transformed them into a publicly recognized military and monastic order. And as you mentioned, he then did become the first Grand Master, and he did propose Baldwin that the order to be trusted to pilgrims to the Holy Land, which kind of gives them more reason to go hunting for artifacts during the Crusade.
So historically, after the First Crusade, more Christians became, I don't want to say aware, but more started traveling to Jerusalem. And they were slaughtered from the road after they get off the ship from Jaffa. They'd be slaughtered on their way to Jerusalem. So Hugh, and I think there were 7 other knights, basically they went to King Baldwin II and said, we want to protect these people. And he agreed, giving them headquarters in a wing of the royal palace on the Temple Mount. Now, this mosque that was given to them, Al-Qaza, was believed to be built on top of the ruins of the Temple of Solomon, which we see in the first Assassin's Creed game. So that's where they originally take their name of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. So for those first 8 years or so, they were just protecting people from Jaffa to Jerusalem. Now, that's their historic, the face that we see without diving in deeper of the lore of Assassin's Creed. So if you dive in deeper, why did they want to protect all of these people? Well, protection would have given them access to people. So if anyone was bringing an artifact or had a little bit more knowledge than someone should have, it would give them kind of first access to that.
Now, I can't find it in the notes or anything I've written, but one of the biggest I'm going to call it conspiracy theory because there's no real known information that I found, is one of the reasons why the Templar Knights was formed around the Crusade was looking for a piece of Eden. Well, I'm going to call it a piece of Eden, but the Holy Grail. It's one of the biggest mythos that the Templars went hunting for the Holy Grail. But there's no mention that Bernard or Hugo's went looking for pieces of Eden.
No. And now I remember reading somewhere that the Templars were formed because they were looking for um, the chalice or the cup of Christ. We see that in popular fiction like Indiana Jones. The knight guarding the cup was a Templar. Actually, he might have been Hugo himself. I don't remember that movie enough to tell you. But if you look in Assassin's Creed, the and you step outside of the chalice being the person from the Altair handheld game, they talk about the Apple of Eden in Solomon's temple being what they had been looking for. So seeing the creation on top of the Temple Mount, it could have taken them 200 years to do everything that they said they would do publicly while excavating that land to get to the apple.
So it took them a long time to find what they're looking for. So reading a lot about the Latin rule, Hugo de Paynes and Bernard, it doesn't seem that, I don't know how it happened because I can't find any rules, but it doesn't seem that after Alfred's change and resurrection of the Order, that the Pieces of Eden were ever on their mind. There seems to be a gap of when Pieces of Eden became, we must find them, because it didn't seem that Alfred was interested in them. There's plenty
Well,
around England.
within the games, we don't know what we don't know. We legitimately don't know what happens with the Order from Valhalla to Assassin's Creed. We know from the essential guides that they were founded, the Templars came out publicly alongside the historical dates. So we can take a lot from the history. But he might not have wanted anything to do with the Pieces of Eden because of the fanaticism shown by Folke and the 3 other members of the Order that wanted to kill him. He might have saw them as things that should be left buried.
So it's safe to say that, as we already know in the law with Otzelberg, it's safe to theorize that greed may have eventually crept back into the Templars. They may have had this idealistic approach of being protectors from behind the curtains. They pull the strings to make sure there's order and no chaos. But as you know, for the Stigma team being created, do we know that their ideology creates greed? And it could be greed from old artifacts and old texts that led to some Templars believing, hey, we need Pieces of Eden. We need more artifacts from the first civilization to give ourselves order. If the Isu can bring order to humans through dominance, why can't we do the same?
And the thing about Alfred, from what I can remember from the little we see of him in Valhalla, all he really wanted was order. He was just worried about what the Vikings were going to do to England and the order that he sought so hard to form. If he felt like those artifacts were either blasphemous, which is what I believe was his case and why that he kind of just let them go, he would have destroyed all the documentation of it. He would have controlled history that way, controlling the story, controlling what was the written word. And it would have taken decades, if not multiple generations, to realize the hidden truth of the Pieces of Eden within what was written, what did survive. So take Hugh and his public outcry of the Templars. Let's say Alfred rebuilt the Order of Ancients into the Templar Order. He calls it the Templars and he moves on. Now, he would have started it as a secret society because that was what he was used to and how he wanted to implement his control. So if we have those 300 years between Valhalla and no, because it was 875 we end Valhalla on.
880,
880. Okay.
I believe it was.
Well, I know Siege of Paris is 885. So
That would make sense. So 880 we end the main campaign, and it was about 1129 the formation
yeah,
was
that was
created.
the public. That was when Rome backed the Templar Order. So somewhere in that span of years, it very easily could have heard a story of these pieces of Eden that control minds and create illusions, because they would have essentially destroyed information, and then they just find the apple or information on the apple, creating these illusions. So you create a secret order, or you take the secret order and find a way to what basically put it into the public opinion to where they need to be in a certain spot. So if you find that it potentially is hidden in Solomon's temple, you find a way for the public to allow you to stay in that area. You do that by saying, hey, King, we're going to protect the people from Jaffa to Jerusalem. All we ask is that you give us a headquarters on the Temple Mount.
Perfect way to get what you want. And it's safe to say, looking at Assassin's Creed 1, Robert, I forgot his full name.
Robert de Saab.
Thank you for saving me. He is hunting the Ark of Covenant, a very big, popular pulp fiction artifact, from Indiana Jones, as you mentioned, but he didn't seem to have an idea what it was except for the apple that was on top. So it seems that by that point of Assassin's Creed 1, their knowledge was basic. I think the Grandmaster of the Assassins, he only figured it out through knowledge and research and became corrupt. But I don't think the
Well,
Templars knew fully what it was.
Well, the thing with Al Mualim, he knew about it because he also was, well, how much of a Templar he was, that's debatable. But he was with Robert when they found it, or when they found that it was actually in Solomon's temple.
So I had totally forgot he was part of the Templars. I'm replaying Assassin's Creed 1 and I haven't even got to the ending yet. This is what I meant at the start. 14 years, people. It's been going,
Yep.
and my mind's turned to mush. It's what you get for having Assassin's Creed 1, then a year later Assassin's Creed 2, then a year later Brotherhood.
Yeah, we got a lot in that time period, and that's one of the reasons why I try to replay the series almost every year.
Yeah, it makes your head scratch. So,
Um,
yeah, I'm going crazy. So, we know that the Templars have evolved from an idea of unification to backing, but there's now this whole issue of, even though there's backing and there's more evolution going on, why did they not bother reforming? Because we know that Otterberg took charge of the Stigma team because of greed. The Templars knew there was greed, and they needed a team within a team to deal with rogue agents. So what led the Templars to finally believe that we shouldn't just keep disbanding and rebanding every time someone goes rogue? We should just stop them. And then I'll give you this theory to answer. Is it possible that over the course of evolution, they started pulling assassins along to take out the rogue agents they didn't want, exactly like Valhalla and Odyssey?
I can see instances in the lore of Assassin's Creed where Templars could, in theory, use assassins to do their bidding to take out these rogue agents. You see that within Unity, for example, and it's blatant in that one. You have Germain using Arno to take out one of Elise's only allies. You also have, oh goodness, Edward Kenway not realizing that his bookkeeper was a Templar. So there's a whole bunch of stories where assassins don't know they're working for Templars and essentially doing their bidding. So before you mentioned Otto Berg and Sigma Team, that doesn't even touch on the fact that he is currently, well, assuming he's capable, he's the Templar Black Cross, which is that Templar that is the Templar boogeyman. He's the one that keeps them on the straight and narrow, keeps them from getting too greedy. There are two or three that I can think of off the top of my head historically. There's Otso, and then there's a man by the name of Alan Bolden, he, late 1920s, and he was the Black Temple. He was the Black Cross, which, so I could see maybe even a story where an assassin becomes the first Black Cross. We don't know when that title was created, the story behind it, so very well could be. Could even be Shay.
I was just about to say that. Could it be Shay? But no title was given because we do know that he went rogue. He worked for them. It could be that they knew from history that they could have used assassins or people who work with the Brotherhood to straighten them out. Why can't they keep doing it instead of reforming? So Shay could be the final predecessor to what Cassandra started. Cassandra was their first idea of a Black Cross, but it wasn't exactly a Black Cross because they destroyed and rebranded. Avon was again another proto Black Cross, but again it was destroyed and rebranded. Where Shay could have been that actually,
where
like,
he started the lineage of the Black Cross. Yeah,
yeah,
he trained his son, his grandson. Very very well could be. I need to read Last Descendants again just
yeah.
to see if there's hints about Crudgel being a Black Cross.
I remember in Last Sentence, it's on my mind because I finished it a month ago. He gets a note from a Templar leader to take out an assassin, and he's just runs an ordinary life, but he's then summoned to do the work for the Templars, like a bounty hunter sort of style, and he makes
Which
references to
makes
it.
sense.
So that would be what the Black Cross did. They give Otso orders, he takes them out. He's done a lot for them behind the scenes to put them straight and narrow. So through evolution, Cassandra and Ava could have started what they thought would be easier as a lineage as a Black Cross.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to connect those dots, I think. And we mentioned how the Templars are, well, they became a public face, but we didn't really talk about how. So there's a story, in my opinion, where Bernard, he was a very vocal man historically. He created multiple abbeys. He at the Council of Troy and backed the Templars and brought them forward to be backed by Rome. He went across Europe where he convinced leaders to back Pope Innocent II instead of the anti-pope Anacletus II. He then went and convinced people that the Second Crusade was a good idea. And seeing how this man is such a great orator, it makes sense to me that there's a story there where he is holding a piece of Eden. It could be an apple, it could be his staff, could be multiple things. So I can see a story where him and Hugh, who are both French, who possibly in theory could have met each other because so little is known about Hugh's life, where they could have came up with this plan of, you go to Jerusalem, that's where we believe this piece of Eden to be. You set up this order publicly, and then come back to France, and I will convince the Pope to make us public, and then people will give us money, have us take care of their land, and then we can start building out the control that we believe the world needs.
It's, it's kind of a perfect. I would actually agree that that would be perfect. It's a perfect evolution for the Templars. They've gone from a unified cult that's still in secret to somebody like Bernard going around convincing people. I'm I'm gonna say, judging by how the pictures of how he's dressed, I'd say maybe a brooch or something on his jacket that used to carry on him could have been a piece of Eden. For him knowing that would, I'm gonna dub it as gift of the gab. So as he talks, people are persuaded more,
Yeah.
as you suggested. So it builds that mental picture that, hey, this is a good idea. So when the Templars come to light, it's not a big shock, but it's more of a, okay, we agree this is something that's needed.
And it's very possible that he would have known more about Pieces of Eden than anyone, because he also knew the Abbot Shugair, who had an Apple of Eden and used it to essentially create the Gothic architecture. He created a special sword. And it's very possible that Bernard had an innate ability. Well, I would say it's a God-given ability historically to convince people to do what he felt was a good thing. But if you tie that into a piece of Eden, you very well could tie the story into Assassin's Creed. You can tie it into Unity, Valhalla. You can go just about anywhere with it.
And I think this just kind of sums up the perfect evolution of the Creed. Well, not the Creed, the Templars order. They've realized that they could never become a public face till somebody was brave enough to try and become that public face. And if it wasn't for the joint effort between Hugo Paynes and Bernard, we may never have got a public face for the Templars, which I think would have drastically changed the game.
Yeah, if everybody was hidden, well, everybody in Assassin's Creed, the first one, for instance, is secretly brothers in arms. You don't realize that the Saracen leaders are working for Robert. You don't realize that the leaders of the Knights Teutonic and the Knights Hospitalier are working under Robert. You don't even realize that the mentor of the Assassins Brotherhood, it worked at one point with Robert. So even though you don't share all of your members, if you have this public face, you're less likely to be fully destroyed than if you were all a secret society.
And one that I brought up during the an Assassin's Creed podcast, by going public, you can inadvertently create martyrs. And back in that time frame, martyrs were one of the most revered people. So if your Templar agent was known for doing good, but an assassin murdered them for doing bad because secretly they were kidnapping people and performing inhuman experiments, you create a martyr out of a Templar, which means people more respect the Templars and get behind them. So by bringing them public, Hugo's de Paynes and Bernard created a double-edged sword for assassins. You can take them out, but they're never going to be destroyed because you'll either create a martyr in them, or the public face is so strong that they'll just keep coming back willingly.
And one of the things I am forgetting to even mention was the Templar Order didn't come out publicly until after the Assassin Order did. The Assassin Order historically was created when, I'm drawing a blank on the man who did this, but he took over Alamut Castle, essentially created his own country, and used the assassins. I'm not even going to try to pronounce what they were in their native tongue. I'm not even going to try that. But they came out publicly first. So it's kind of one of those two sides of the same coin, because they took Alamut in 1090. So what is that? Almost 30 years later, then the Templars start coming out publicly.
Yeah.
So you can see a story where Bernard and Hugh are getting reports from the Middle East and France that are saying, well, the hidden ones are no longer the hidden ones. They have come out publicly as assassins. That will eventually spread across the world, where all the hidden ones become assassins. So they kind of look at it and go, okay, so what do we do to keep up with their growing influence? They go public as the Templars. They try to find pieces of Eden. They try to convince nobles to give them money, which they do, and then it just starts building that layer of control, because they convince the wealthy people to pay them for all. I don't want to diminish their role historically, but for almost doing nothing. They essentially became the world's first bank.
That is also true. So what they created was they kind of one-upped assassins. Assassins came public, and assassins can't work publicly. Like, as we know from Assassin's Creed 1, they had to go. Altair had to push them back to the dark because it didn't work. So it's funny to see how the Templars work better in the light, but the assassins work better in the dark.
Yes, yeah, the Templars. It's easier to give control when you're a public face, but it's harder to give freedom when you're a public face, because that's really what Altair stood for. Uh, it's one of the ironies of the creed. We strive for freedom, yet we conform ourselves to the essentially to the creed, and it's something you can see. If they were public, they can't necessarily say, oh yeah, you go do what you want, you have freedom, but you have to conform to this creed. And it's harder to do it that way.
And if we're on the topic of ironies, and I had to put this in because I thought this was funny as hell to read, Dante, um, this is ironic. There is a poem by a famous poet called Dante who made Bernard what was it? I was talking to you about it. A guide. He in the Dante's three poems, Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradiso. Bernard led Dante into paradise, but in Assassin's Creed lore, Dante was an assassin, but Bernard was a Templar. So
Yeah.
it's gonna in my head that literature, a Templar led an assassin to heaven, which is just weird to think about. But I had to find a way to shoehorn that in because I'm strange.
Well, it is true, because you would think that Dante Alighieri, when he wrote Divine Comedy, would use it to publicly disgrace, deface members of the Templar Order. And he doesn't really do that so much with Bernard. He just comes out and says, he's my guide through the seven rings of heaven. And
Jesus.
it makes me wonder if in the 300 years between Bernard and Dante, if they had lost the information that Bernard was a Templar. Because historically, Bernard was not a Templar.
Plot twist. To be honest, it kind of makes sense, the amount of evolution to grow and the amount of time lost between the Templar at the beginning in 1129 and Assassin's Creed 2, where Dante is most known. Well, Assassin's Creed, Assassin's Creed 2's family crypt, because Dante helped create the Auditeri family with Domenico Auditeri. So the amount of time frame between the Templars and Assassin's Creed 2, all documentation could have been lost. No one really keeps track of the little people to keep track of the big people, and by then, a lot more people made bigger splashes than Hugo de Paynes and Bernard.
Yeah, and we see that throughout the history of Assassin's Creed. In Assassin's Creed 1, that's one of the mentions from Warren Vidic. Do you have secret knowledge based on past world events? History was written by someone. They could leave this out, leave that out, tell things in a completely incorrect way. So it's very easy for someone like Alfred, who controls the literature in England, to wipe away all the references of the Isu, destroy their tablets, burn Folk Age writings. And we see that with in Assassin's Creed, in the first one, with Jubair destroying books. We even see that in Assassin's Creed 2 in the Bonfire of the Vanities with Savonarola. So there's a lot of instances within the series and, well, within history itself where history is destroyed to hide something. If that's the Hidden Ones, the Order of the Ancients, the Isu, the Templars, who's to say?
And I think that's a great way to end the show. Who's to say? So we know how the Templar Order has evolved, but it's still evolving. The game's still growing, but Bernard and Hughes don't have a lot of information. Digging for information on the lore, you can find some ton of great historical text for real life, but the text for assassin lore is very minute. It's as if the records of their involvement was just wiped for the bigger people, as Assassin's Creed 1 with Robert DeCero. I'm probably going to get told off for butchering his name. He kind of was a bigger splash than Bernard and Hughes because he got a piece of Eden. He led an assault on Masaev. He's big. That's what assassins want to think about, is the big people, not the little people.
Yep. And how, if you are going after the Templars and they have a public face, how do you let them survive for hundreds of years until I'm drawing a blank on his name, Jacques de Molay, to when they go underground? So it's like I get the story behind there where the assassin has convinced the French king to do it, but it's one of those things to where you go, how, if you have been a secret society for 200 years or so, let the Templars, who have a public face, still control much of the wealth within Europe and have that control?
So it's as if we keep being asked, well, I've been asked, and I'm asking, for more Isu, I'm stuck with Isu lately, more Templar lore, but it seems that we know more about assassins than we do Templars. Their evolution is still a mystery. We know that, as I mentioned at the very start, there is foundations laid by Cain, the son of Adam and Eve, but Adam and Eve were proto-assassins. What, they created a Templar? So there is a lot of evolution mysteries that still surround them, and we can't discuss them all in this episode because there's too much mystery, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we see everything within the series except for one game from the eyes of assassins. The books, Eyes of Assassins, Eyes of the Hidden Ones, Eyes of Amistios, Eyes of a random Viking who stays out of it but is chasing a piece of Eden.
But she is an Isu.
So there's so much that we don't know because we don't see their perspective. Sure, we have the Templar comic that follows Otto Berg. We have Assassin's Creed Rogue. Even the Ascendance event in Assassin's Creed Last Descendants, that's taken from an Abstergo point of view, if I remember right.
Yes.
Because they're captured. They might be technically, the kids might be assassins, but they're captured by Abstergo. But that actually, speaking of that, is a perfect instance. Victoria from Assassin's Creed Odyssey is in those novels as a Templar. We have no idea how she became an assassin sympathizer and why she's working with William and Layla in Odyssey. We're missing a lot about Templars throughout the series.
And it's that much missing data is why I replied to AC Landmarks, because I'm going to shout anyway, who asked if as who's better, Assassins versus Templars. And because we don't know a lot about Templars themselves, I argue that no one's better. Assassins aren't better than Templars, and Templars aren't better than Assassins, because from what we have been told in the games, they are identical. The beliefs are the same for freedom. It's their actions that are different to get to the goal. But I believe if we learn more about the Templars, given more detail than we've ever been told, then maybe we would finally get the answer to who is better, Assassins or Templars, because the more we know about the Assassins, the more we're forced to say Assassins are better. But
Well,
what were you going to say?
well, it's kind of what we see throughout the games. It's all based on the prism of the story that we're looking at. Assassins and Templars are two sides of the same coin. When we're playing as an assassin, we're sympathetic to the assassin cause, and we see the Templars as the villain. But when we're playing as the Templar, in Shay's case, and we look at the assassins, we see them as the villain and sympathetic to the assassins. Or to the Templars, I'm sorry. So they're the same side of the coin. You just have to realize, are you one for order and tyranny or freedom and chaos? Because they use essentially the same tactics, just kind of doing the same difference, so to speak. They're trying to hit the same goals according to Assassin's Creed 1, freedom. But the Templars are going for it in a tyrannical order fashion, and the Assassins are going to it through a chaotic freedom manner.
And that's sadly all we've got time for tonight. So if we get more I'm going to keep saying Isu for some reason. If we get more Templar information, I would love to revisit this topic and find out more about the evolution, because learning about the evolution through Bernard and Hugo and Alfred has been interesting, but I want to see more evolution. I want to see this whole story of Cain creating the Templar Order, because there's a lot of lore around Cain himself and a piece of Eden that will give him immortality, which is known as the Curse of Cain. So it'd be really cool to see how that would tie into the mystios of the Templars and their evolution. What went on between Alfred and Bernard? What happened in all the years? What were the Templars doing? It's more evolution than we'd like to see, and I hope you enjoy today's episode where we looked at the evolution we can find out now, and hopefully we should do some more Templar episodes in the future. If you do like this episode and you want to chat to me about everything discussed, you can email me at assassinscreedletstalk@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter at ACLetsTalk. If you're actually interested in chatting to Andrew, you can find him on Twitter at Visions of the Past. Links are in description.
It's Visions_AC.
Oh, Visions. See, I will admit I run Twitter every day and I still don't know how to work it. I'm a 25-year-old man that's terrible at technology. What is wrong with me? How am I running a podcast?
Big record button.
Big record. To be honest, guys, hint, hint, when I do my 100th episode, you will get to see behind the scenes of how I record and edit. More to come. You will see I do have a big record button. There is a big stop button. It's very simple. It flashes as well, so I don't need technical information. I just need a big flashy button. So thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you all next week.
Bye. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome, dude.